Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Wilson from the State Water Survey at the University of Illinois. Today, we're doing a webinar on septic systems, kind of Septic Systems 101. And this is a fairly basic class that's meant to enhance the program we have for the private well class, which I do want to mention we're funded through the Rural Community Assistance Partnership, RCAP, and through funding from US EPA. And so they're our partner on the program and on our website, and all the work that's being done around the country by RCAP folks at the regions. It's all part of the same program that they manage. So we have a partnership with NEHA, the National Environmental Health Association, and so all of these webinars are now worth CE use through NEHA. And if you're interested in that, here's the information. You can, I put on here the past webinar was delivered, this webinar with the same core content was delivered a year ago, but I don't believe we were doing CEs back then. And so this is probably the first time, so that's probably not a concern. But if we offer this webinar in the future, you're only allowed to use this same webinar once every 2 years whenever your credentialing cycle expires. So there are handouts. If you look at your GoToWebinar screen on the side, there's a handouts button, and the handouts are there that you need. You can also email us, and Katie will help you with any questions you have as far as getting a certificate and copy the slides and all that stuff after this is over. Okay, so today this is part, again, of a national program that's being run jointly by RCAP and the State Water Survey called the Private Well Class. We are recording this, and it will be available on our webpage and on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, probably by early next week, if not the end of this week. And so you are given an opportunity to ask questions in advance. We actually got 94 questions, which we can't answer all today. But we also have an opportunity, if you go to your questions or chat box on your GoToWebinar screen, you can, a question comes up today on something that I've said or Jim said, you can follow up, and Katie's tracking those, and we'll deal with those at the very end. So if you have questions today, we'll still be able to get to some of those time permitting. So I'm Steve Wilson. I'm a groundwater hydrologist, and I'm more of a groundwater and wells person, which is why we have Jim Starbird with us today, who's with RCAP Solutions. He's a licensed sanitarian and is with the Health Department in Massachusetts for 7 years. He helped us last year with this webinar, and you know, Jim really is our expert. He knows a lot about septic systems, and we really appreciate his time today. And also Katie Buckley, who works here with me, is our outreach specialist, and she's taking your questions. She does all the organization and sets things up for all of this, all of our webinars. So I want to mention RCAP if you're not familiar. The Rural Community Assistance Partnership, it's a network of 6 nonprofits with different names: Communities Unlimited, Midwest Assistance Program, Great Lakes RCAP. Jim is from RCAP Solutions in the Northeast. RCAC, a lot of you have probably heard of if you're in the West. Not only do they do a lot of work to help small communities, but also private well owners. So they deal with technical assistance and training for related to water, wastewater infrastructure, support for well owners. We do assessments for well owners, and also they do a lot of housing work as well, which I'm not really privy to. So if you're not familiar and you're interested, let us know. They are the folks on the ground. They have boots on the ground, if you will, who are making our program work and doing workshops around the country for well owners and for sanitarians and others. And so if you want to find out more information about something that might be in your area, let us know, and it's also on our webpage. So the water survey, most people have never heard of us. I just show a couple slides because we've been around for over 100 years in the state of Illinois. We're kind of the research arm of the state. We're a sister agency to our state geological survey, and the work we do started because of cholera and typhoid outbreaks, public health issues, but it's branched out. We have the state climatologists, the state hydrologists, and a number of folks who we do applied research and public service related to water in every sphere: atmospheric sciences, groundwater, surface water, and chemistry. And I'm in the groundwater section, so we do a lot of research looking at our aquifers and wells and things like that. And you know, like to show this because it gives you an idea of why we started. This is Pana, Illinois, and it's cases of typhoid fever from April 16th to May 9th in 1916. Back then, that was a big issue. And in this particular case, this is in our records. We actually have a person who's going through all of our historical records, and we're trying to digitize all this information. But this is you could see in the middle here, it says Pana Ice Cream Company. It turns out that's what they attributed to the outbreak to. Not much different than the well in London sort of approach. It's one place where everyone was getting their contaminated ice cream, and it caused all these outbreaks in Pana. So trying to figure all that stuff out, that's kind of what we do, I guess is one way to say it. So today we're here to talk about septic systems. And my knowledge is really just with conventional systems, none of the new aerobic or any of that stuff. And those questions certainly, hopefully, Jim can handle. But they're really, they're a wastewater treatment system, no different than a city wastewater treatment system, except it's pretty basic. They still have to be managed and maintained. So they use natural degradation by bacteria to reduce all the wastewater that you produce in your home so that it can infiltrate into the ground and break down. And your tank really is that vessel to break that stuff down. And so as long as you operate it and according to the way it's meant to be operated, it works great. And it works naturally. It doesn't need anything added to it or anything changed. And so what the tank does is it separates the solids and also gives the bacteria time to do their job. And then, so the liquids then leave through the piping system, which is your drain field in most cases, and dispersed and slowly infiltrate into the ground where they're further broken down by natural bacteria in the soil. This is what a system looks like. I guess that's a little blurry. I apologize. This is a two-compartment system. So water comes in, or the waste comes in from your house. The solids drop out. Some things float. There's a weir in the middle, if you will, to keep that stuff there. And it moves on through to the second system as new water comes in, and eventually goes out through an exit pipe to a perforated set of pipes or in a gravel drain field. And so when working properly, you can see the solids on the left-hand side and the bottom. As those start to fill up, that's why you need to pump your tank. When those things get overflowed or you overload the system, some of that can get into the second compartment, or if there's no second compartment, into the drain field pipe, and that'll start plugging that stuff up, and that's when you start to have problems. And this is available, a lot of information is actually available on NESE, the National Environmental Services Center's webpage. It's a good source of information, and you can Google that, just National Environmental Services Center, septic, and you can find some information there. There are really two parts to a system. There's the tank, which is on the left here, and this is just a conventional tank that doesn't have that weir in the middle. And so there's scum floating on the top, there's clear water in the middle, and the sludge drops to the bottom. You've got an inspection port and a riser to pump it out in that case, and usually a filter on that back end so that it's not letting solids through out into your septic field. And then the diagram on the right shows two different drainage fields. Usually, if you have soil and enough soil, you put in a sand bed so that it has more room to infiltrate, and the distribution box of water comes into that and flows through, spreading the material out, if you will. There are over 25 million homes that have septic systems in the U.S., which we estimate there's 17 to 18 million private wells, and that difference is in some areas, especially in the east, you see, you see both types. You see small communities that have private wells, and instead of septic, maybe a centralized wastewater system, but you see a lot of drinking water, community water systems that don't have wastewater, and they also have, so they have septic instead. And so, that's the way things are. So when they fail, usually you'll know it. Either you start having thicker green grass around your tank or your drain field, or if it gets bad enough, it could start pooling water and create a pond in your backyard, or the ground gets really spongy, and you start to notice the smell, and it backs up into your house. And they estimate 10% of septic systems have failed this way and backed up into homes because they haven't been pumped properly or taken care of. And that can all be avoided just by understanding your tank and the system you have, what kind of load you're putting on it, and keeping it maintained like you should. So it's really about the size of your system based for your situation. If you have a 1,000-gallon tank and one person, that tank's going to fill up a lot slower and be a problem down the road than a family of 6 that's using a 500-gallon septic system. And there's other things too. Where is it near your well? I know there's a question someone asked about the differences in states' setbacks between a well and the soil field for your septic system. Every state's created different rules, are kind of arbitrary. It's really, you need to understand your soils and geology to know, especially if you're putting in a new system, to keep those things safe. And we've even had cases where I know we had a septic installer here in Illinois who went out to do an inspection, and they put the septic system in, and it was sure enough 100 feet away from the well, but it was in an area where there was more than one house, and it ended up being only 20 feet from the neighbor's well, and that, somebody messed up, basically. So what do you need to do there? As far as sizing and design, it's really a matter of knowing when to pump the solids. That's the main thing, so that it doesn't overflow or doesn't get full, because once it does and it clogs up the outflow, that's when you start seeing things come out of your tank or back into your home. And also the size of your drain field matters, depending on how much water you're using in your home. And to make sure those are properly designed, these days that's a lot less of a worry because most installers are licensed and follow good practice, but it's the older systems that really are a problem. Sometimes they don't even have a drain field. We've certainly ran across septic systems where it's a pipe that ends at a stream or a ditch and or goes straight to a field tile. And those, aren't protective. Those field tile run right to streams or ditches as well. And so you're putting waste that's not safe into the ecosystem that way. So as far as public health goes, again, if you do have a straight pipe to somewhere on the surface, it's illegal in most states, if not all. Jim could probably correct me on that. And but it's also really harmful to the environment. So you need to understand where your drain field is, what your flow direction is of your shallow groundwater, and usually if it's the water table, which is what affects most septic fields the most, it usually follows topography, flows downhill, and just how close you are to your neighbors and what else might be in the area that could be contaminated. So, and as far as contamination with your well, it really does matter how deep your well is, how much casing it's got, and it's not just well depth. So a sand and gravel well that's 200 feet deep has a screen at the bottom in the sand that might be from 196 to 200. So there's 196 feet of straight solid pipe down to that screen, and water is only getting in the well at 196 feet. You could have a bedrock well that's 200 feet deep that might only have 20 feet of casing. And that's not allowed in most states today, but a lot of older wells are that way. And so the rest of the well is an open borehole through the bedrock with cracks and fissures that let the water in. 20 feet's not much protection for anything from the surface to get in, and that can cause a real health issue. As far as maintenance, you do have to consider them managing. We tell well owners all the time, you need to manage your water system in your well like you do your car. You need to change the oil and do all those things. Same thing with your septic system. It is going to fail eventually. It's a mechanical and chemical device, if you will, that it does have a lifespan, but you can extend that if you manage it properly. So you need to pump it on schedule. Don't put things that don't belong down the drain, because bacteria from your body are what feed that system and make it work. And if you disrupt that and kill the bacteria, then your system can't do what it's supposed to do and break things down. And so all of these things listed here, and these are just some examples: cat litter, grease, coffee grounds, they'll eventually clog your system. They say now they make cat litter that's flushable. It's not. You shouldn't use it. And if you're on a septic system, you're really asking for that to become a problem. So follow best practices, and really your system should last a really long time. I want to show this one figure. This is a table from NESE, the National Environmental Services Center. They run the Small Flows Clearinghouse, And this source of this document actually is from Penn State Extension from them, but it's just an example and one guide you can use, and there's a number out there on, depending on tank size and the number of people in your house, what they estimate the time span is that you should use between pumping the solids out of your septic tank. That doesn't mean you should only open your tank up once every, if you have a 1,000-gallon tank and 4 people, it doesn't mean you should only open your tank once every 2.6 years, or if there's one person every 12 years, you should still have it inspected a little more frequently than that. And I think Jim can answer that in the question part of this today. But this is a guide. And the one thing I will say is that if you have a garbage disposal and you're putting, vegetables, fruits, stems, all that other stuff down your sink, then you should take these numbers and divide them in half. Those solids can't be broken down easily. They end up settling in the bottom, and they fill up your tank really fast. So if you're a person who has a septic system, you really shouldn't use a garbage disposal at all. But if you do, then you need to realize that you need to check and see how quickly that's filling up your septic tank. So for a to-do list, maintain the area around your tank and drain field so that you can access it. We have folks ask us all the time, how do I find my septic tank? They don't even know where it's at. No trees, concrete. You should never drive over your septic field or asphalt so that you can't do those things. We see a lot of times where the reason a septic system fails is because roots have gotten in to those perforated holes in the drain field and gone back and plugged everything up, or just broken the pipe and got in that way. But you shouldn't have anything around your septic field. And I realize some homes that are in a really wooded area, that's going to be very difficult to avoid, but you should do that as much as you can. Also, by reducing the flow into your system and just using what's coming out of your house from, showers, toilets, and cooking and those things, it gives the bacteria more time to work, and it does a better job of breaking things down. You shouldn't have your sump or whirlpool or a softener backwash go in there, and especially the softener backwash. There's debate on how much that affects the chemistry in your tank to some degree, but it's just a bad idea from the standpoint of you don't want to increase the amount of flow through your septic if you don't have to. And only put things that belong there. Again, garbage disposals dramatically increase the amount of solids in your tank. You don't need to use any additives. And the first time we did this webinar 3 or 4 years ago, I must have got 20 people who called me who swear by their additives they use. What all the research shows, and I'll answer this in the question part, is that if you maintain your system properly, you don't need any additives. And if it makes you, if you think it does help, there's certainly a big market for that, so there may be something going on, but there's really no proof that it actually does. The big thing is not to put man-made stuff, pharmaceuticals, paint. You're done with your amoxicillin, your kid was sick, and you throw it down your toilet, you're putting things that kill bacteria into your septic tank, and that's just a really bad idea. So, and again, inspect your tank regularly so you can measure the solids so you understand how fast it does fill up. And you can probably even do that yourself if you work with a septic person who can give you that information. So the rest of what I'm going to talk about really is information that's available on the web. As I said before, my expertise is groundwater and wells. Because septic systems are such a big part of private well issues, many times whenever there's a bacteria hit, it's one of 2 reasons. It's because there's a nearby septic or because there's a nearby livestock. And so it is an important thing to understand and to maintain. There's actually even a lot more rules around the country related to septic systems than there are for private wells. And so they're more heavily regulated because of the risks to the ecosystem and environment as well as public health that they can cause. And so there tends to be a lot of resources available, and those are growing. And so one website that has a lot of information is NESE, the National Environmental Services Center. And if you just Google them and septic, you can find a lot of products that they have that you can download. A lot of them are from other sources, but they're free, and they're pretty useful. There's also a group at the University of Minnesota that's developing this tool that's an owner's guide tool, so that it's really as much for your septic installer If you put in a new system, they can use this to give you basically a booklet that's generated from this boilerplate information on operation and maintenance guidelines and everything else. You can download it yourself. We know that some septic installers actually download this and put their own logo on it and then provide it to their customers, and that's why they build it this way. So it's a useful guide, and that program's ongoing. There's also the National Rural Water Association developed this app called Septic Insight, and it's really, a lot of this app is good for you one time as far as locating your tank, measuring the size of your tank, understanding some of the best practices you need to do. Then after that, really the app becomes a calendar for when you need to do things, and it links to other sources. But it does provide some useful information, especially if you're new at dealing with your septic system. So it gives you some examples on how to do things like measure the size of your tank if you're not sure. You can answer a bunch of questions, and it'll give you an idea of what kind of risks you might have. And they're pretty basic things, but they're trying to get at, like black soil above your system or drain, or is it bedrock at your surface? Things like that matter. And lastly, what I want to talk about is the EPA's website on septic systems. So their on-site decentralized wastewater program has really, it's been around for a while. They started out with the Septic Smart program a number of years ago, but over the last couple of years, they've put a lot more resources into it. And I know just from last year to this year, there's been a lot that's changed. And so I'm going to go through pieces of it because there's a ton of information here. And if you really want to learn about your septic system, you can go here and you can spend a lot of time finding information, but there's some really valuable stuff. Like the bottom blue bullet here at the top of the page says home financing from USDA Rural Development. There's ways for you to get funding to revamp your system or to build a new one if yours is failing in certain circumstances. So there's a lot of good things here. So if I click on Overview of Septic Systems, on the left side here, it says Septic System Home, learn about septic systems, Septic Smart Homeowners, technical resources, decentralized, and programs related to septic systems. Those are the main categories. So under learn about septic systems, there's 3 parts, and you can look at this overview and look at some case studies and demonstrations that have been done. Some of those are more for small communities and cluster systems, as well as for an individual homeowner. But some of the quote meat for you as a homeowner would be the Septic Smart Homeowners page. When you go there, you get a breakdown of all these different subcategories, how it works, why you need to maintain it. So if you click on your septic system can be impacted by other water sources, then it takes you to this page where they've created these interactive graphics. So I clicked on septic systems and drinking water, and when you do that, this is the top of the page. Okay, sorry. And if you scroll down the page, you got a diagram, or you can do it by table. It shows you all the different pieces of a typical septic tank. So I clicked on 9, which is your well. Could my well be affected? And it's got information. You can scroll further down this page. It talks about what increases your risk, what lowers your risk, those sorts of things. But this diagram is really an effective one in the sense that this is what can happen to water from your drain field. If you dump things on the ground, if you bury things. I know I grew up on a farm. My dad buried things in some cases when I was a kid, not understanding the risk that meant for our well and things. So, and people, especially in the country, that's just what was always done, when I was young anyway. And so it's a really good diagram of what can happen. And it shows on the well here that there's a little drawdown right by the well. That's why there's that little cone shape. Depending on how good your aquifer is, that cone shape could be extended out much further, all the way back to where the water is seeping in from the water table, above the water table. So it just gives you an idea and a visualization of what might be going on. If you go to the Technical Resources tab, which is the third one on the left, under Technical Information, there's a lot of good information. There's a lot of alternative septic systems today, aerobic systems and more modern systems that are basically small treatment plants, where areas are more vulnerable, the geology is vulnerable, or there's just not enough room to adequately treat the wastewater. And so when you look through this, there's a number of looking at wastewater technologies and other things. There's a lot here. I clicked on Advanced On-Site Technology Products Approved by State because it takes you to a state listing. And so this is that page. It talks about different treatment and collection options. And some states are ahead of the game. Some states are behind. Some have more resources or have more of a environmental issue with septic tanks than other states. And so you see different states in their how far along they are in this process of providing this information. So if we scroll down this page, we get to a part where it shows all the states. And if you click on the Illinois Department of Public Health, it takes you to this page on their webpage. And actually, if you do that today, the EPA page still links to the old IDPH site, and it doesn't have as much information there. But we'll talk to EPA and let them know about that. But this is the page they have today for the Illinois Department of Public Health. And on the right, it shows some of the resources that are available. Septic installers have to get continuing education. There's a renewal program, and there's also a search if you're looking for a private contractor to help you. But it's really ran at the state level, or at the county level, excuse me, and so the best folks in Illinois to talk to are probably your county health department because they act as an agent for the state. On the other side, if I click on Massachusetts, they've got a very robust program on septic, and it's called Title V. So if you scroll down this page, you end up in this section right here where you can see all the different information they have on permitting and reporting and what Title V is, which I'm sure Jim can explain, and I didn't bother to read what Title V is exactly. But if you click on the Title V page, it takes you to this website where you can get information. And there's a lot to this page if you scroll down. And so if you're in Massachusetts, because of some of the septic issues you have there and the way they're regulated, and that's what Jim did for 7 years, there's a lot available to you. So, looking locally is always better than nationally. Like on our site, we have some resources that give you basic information, or even the stuff I stepped through earlier on this webinar. But when it gets down to the nitty-gritty and you have specific questions, you should look out like to your local health department for answers. Two other pieces I want to mention on this page. One is EPA has done a bunch of webcasts that are recorded. So they're on different parts of the wastewater game, if you will. Some of them are more about public health. Some are more about things like Septic Smart Week, which is in September every year. And there's one here on Own Your Future, Home Financing from USDA Rural Development. If you click on that, it takes you to down the page where it shows this webinar that you can watch. And the presenter was Barry Ramsey from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He's the home loan person, if you will. But there is a program where you can get funding from USDA, as well as some funding from other sources for improvements to your well or your septic system. And even the SRF funds that EPA gives to the states can be used in some areas. And so if you click on below webcasts here on the left side, there's a funding tab under technical resources. And this page goes on. This is just the top of it. There's a number of listed sources for revolving loan funds. And I said SRF, it's a clean water SRF on the wastewater side. And again, some states are using that for decentralized wastewater treatment efforts as well, where you can get a loan at a low cost and things like that. So under Septic Smart Homeowners, the last, I think this is the last thing I wanted to talk about. There's an outreach toolkit page, and this page also goes down the page. This is just the top of the page, but if I scroll down, you run into a lot of resources, including this new homebuyers brochure and guide that they've developed, and I don't think that was available last year. There's also just a septic owner's guide further down this page, but if you click on the guide, you can see this. It's a 4-page, I think, brochure or document, if you will, that gives you some information on what you should look for if you're buying a home. It's the same thing we tell well owners about buying a home with a well. It's buyer beware. in most states, there are no rules or very few rules for testing a well prior to purchase. That's not true everywhere. But as someone who's going to put an investment in a home, several $100,000 or more, it's worth your while to make sure that your well water is safe, that you have a good septic system, and it's worth your time to have that all inspected before you sign on the dotted line. We see all the time, we get calls from well owners, especially on the water quality side, where they bought this home, they thought everything was fine, and they find out their well's contaminated 2 years later. And so it is buyer beware. And so these guides are really useful. So as far as more resources for homeowners, the last button under Septic Smart Homeowners, I brought this up because it takes you to the private well page. The third bullet here says protecting your private drinking water well. So if you click on that, it takes you to the private well page, which starts a whole nother list of pages and subpages related to private wells, which I'm not going to go into today. We're going to try to answer more of your questions today, but I wanted you to be aware that this information is there, and it's and they've made it really simple. It's just epa.gov/private wells, just like the septic page is epa.gov/septic. So they're easy to find. There's a lot of good information available, including some of the resources from our program that EPA funds. So the first link in the green box there for related links, the first bullet says private well training. That's our private well class. The bottom one, the private well assessment and workshops, that actually goes to RCAP Solutions webpage to talk about these well assessments that Jim and some of his colleagues are doing at RCAP Solutions around the Northeast to help well owners understand the issues they might have with their wells. So as far as local resources, I've already mentioned, I think, really it's your county and local public health department. Co-op Extension has a lot of information and is very helpful, or your licensed septic inspector installer. And all of them should be able to provide you information and answer your questions. So, and that's all I have for the webinar part, or the talk part of this, if you will. But we received almost 100 questions, and we want to try to deal with a number of those today. So we obviously can't answer all of those. And if you asked a specific question about your state or the rules in your state, we always get a bunch of those. We'd prefer you just send us an email. This is a national audience, and so getting into too many specifics, is not necessarily as appropriate. So we do have an email address. If you go to our webpage, we also have a phone number. You can call us. We answer the phone. We answer every email, and we try to find answers if we can. So on a webinar like this one, where I'm not an expert for sure, if we can't answer it, luckily we have Jim today, but if I didn't have him available, I would just say, I can't answer your question today, but let me find out and I'll get back to you. And I'd call somebody like Jim to answer those questions. So, and again, I wanted to remind you that we have there's a question box and a chat box, one or the other probably, on your GoToWebinar pop-up. And if you have any other questions, please put them in there. And Katie's tracking those. And looks like we already have 2 questions that we'll get to at the end. So, and again, I want to introduce Jim Starbird. Jim, you still with us?
Yes, I am.
Excellent. So Jim is a sanitarian and works for RCAP Solutions. Yeah, we're very fortunate to have him with us today. He's done a lot of work with septic systems and private wells through the EPA-funded program and elsewhere. So thanks for joining us, Jim.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, everybody.
So I'm going to answer a few of these questions that are pretty simple that I already had answers for, and then we'll get to the questions for you or if anything comes up. The one we get a lot, I mentioned it earlier, is about additives. Do additives help my system? So on our webpage, you can go to the resource library and go to our blog, and we have an FAQ section that lists certain questions like, do septic additives work? So there's a long answer here, and really the short answer is no. They're not necessarily any better. They don't improve anything as long as you're running your system the way you're supposed to and maintaining it the way you're supposed to. There is a huge market for that. We realize that, and a lot of people feel more comfortable doing those things. But everything that we found, like from this Nessie, again, going back to them and their experts, they made this little fact sheet up based on all the calls they get to their hotline. And, there's been a number of studies on additives. They don't really necessarily show that something's any better by using those. And so we did get a question today from one of someone who registered for the webinar about using dye and dyeing fabric. And they said that they typically use soda ash and salt when they do that, but sometimes when they're dyeing, I think it was silk, that they need an acid environment to do that. Oh yeah, it says it right here. And so they're like, should I add an additive if I'm putting that in my septic system? So Jim, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I personally feel almost the same as the other that you've shown, that most of the time additives aren't needed or necessary. But at the same time, when making an environment that would make it unnatural for the bacteria to live and possibly even die, after that environment is brought back to a neutral pH, there might be some benefit, and underlining might, to almost recharge, what you've taken away. And if you dumped a bunch of bleach down there and killed all your bacteria, or you made the environment so acidic that the bacteria couldn't live, then once it got back to a neutral around 7 pH, there might be some benefit. But I'm highly hesitant to recommend it as a normal way of doing things, if you will.
So the bottom line is they really should just not be putting that stuff in their septic system.
Correct. If possible, I would try to, but also you'd have to dispose of it in a sanitary manner, if you will, not just dump it out back.
Oh no, sure, right. And so I think finding a collection system for that would really be the optimal solution. That's separate from your septic.
Correct.
And although that sounds like it could be expensive, so I get the dilemma. Okay, so the other thing is about softener backwash. There are a number of questions about that. Some states require you to have a different place to put your backwash. Some allow you to put it in your septic system. And so what we did is we found, Rhode Island has some best management practices, and that they recommend that go into a dry well whenever it's possible, because it's the same thing. It's going to affect the water quality in your septic system and how the bacteria work. So it's really just a bad idea to put that in your septic system. And so going through that, this is available on Rhode Island's website, and we can get this to anyone who wants it. Just email us. But it talks about what you should do with that brine instead of putting it through your septic system. And we got a couple other questions about backwash and loading, so I'm leaving these to Jim. And so this was one this is a really odd situation, but it comes back to something you just said about bleach. So the way I understood, because of a medical issue, they're doing this biological treatment. And so when they're this 4-hour period where they're using this medicine, anytime they use the toilet, they have to put bleach in there. I think it was 2 cups of bleach each time, so that it disinfects the toilet. And so over a 4-hour period, they may be using as much as 1 to 2 gallons of bleach. And they want to know if their system can handle it. And I assume that is no. But I wanted to get your take on. I don't know what they would do in that case.
I would definitely say it's no. 2 gallons of bleach, I would imagine, would wipe out any bacterial population within the tank, maybe even the leach field as it bleeds through. If the bleach was still active at that time, didn't get used up by or the organic matter in the septic tank, bare minimum, it would severely damage the population of the good bacteria that are breaking down the waste. Top of my head, the one thing I can think of is maybe during this biological treatment, if you had access inside the septic tank to put like a dechlorinization type of material in the tank prior to the biological treatment, so you get the disinfection in the toilet that you need, but once it hits the septic tank, maybe the chlorine would break down by that dechlorinization. It's seems pretty labor intensive. I'm not sure how much the dechlorer would be to put in all the time, whatnot. But you know, an issue like this, I really don't. You know, the 2 gallons of bleach would definitely have quite an effect. So I'd really try to minimize that effect, whether it be to put the dechlorer in or highly try to dilute the water after. But it's really no easy answer with that much bleach going down at one period of time.
Yeah, we were discussing this here, and one thing would be to mention to your doctor that you're on a septic tank. But your solution sounds like a good one. I wouldn't even have thought of that. We have a fish tank, and we put stuff in our water to take the chlorine out before we use it with our fish. So it's different scale, obviously, but kind of the same thing. So thank you. So some governments require backwash to go into a separate system, but it's all going into the ground. So is one better for groundwater contamination? And really they're asking, why should we, why is there a difference? It's all going in the ground. I assume it's just because of what in your tank, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, it depends on what you're backwashing into that system. And, if you're changing the pH or you're adding additives into that system, you could affect the natural processes that are going in there, as well as you're flooding the system with more water that the leach field and the septic tank have to handle. I will say you showed the slides from Rhode Island, which is the state I work in Massachusetts as well. Massachusetts, if any of you backwash into a Title V septic tank and you have a Title V inspection, it's an automatic failure. So, it's something that's all around New England. It's not allowed, but at the same time, I think it's really for keeping the integrity of your bacteria in that septic tank and not overflowing of it too much water, which we won't have the settling time in the septic tank, and at the same time, you're putting more water into the bleach field than would normally be going into it.
Okay. We had a question, a bunch of people asked about how often do I need to pump? And again, I'm just going to refer back to this guide that Nessie has on their website, but and mention the garbage disposal thing again, because that really is one of the big issues. But Jim, anything else that people should consider, or is there a different guide that you're aware of or use to estimate this? Or I guess the other question I have for you is, what should people do in between the times they pump their tank?
Well, I think you were spot on with your calculation. If you have a garbage grinder, you can cut it in half. In Massachusetts, if you have put in a garbage grinder in a house, your Title V system actually has to be twice as large as a normal one. So we, in the code, try to make up for having that garbage grinder right off the bat by requiring you to have a 2,000-gallon tank instead of a 1,000-gallon tank, and a leach field this size as opposed to that size. So the cut off the maintenance issue, if you will. But I think you're right on with if you are going to put that much organic matter into the system, it's just not going to break down, and you're going to have to pump it more often. I'm sorry, Steve, what was the second part of your question?
I think you answered it. I guess it was, is there anything else? Oh, no, I saw even on EPA's website something about maintenance agreements and maintenance contracts, and I just thought this might, I don't think I have it down below here on the slide deck, so I thought it might be a good place to just say, is it a good idea to do those things, or what should people do besides try to measure the solids? Is there anything else they can really do between pumping their tank, for the times they need to pump their tank?
No, I mean, if they're willing to, open up the tank and see what they have for solids that they can see on top, I mean, they probably don't know what the sludge is at the bottom. But at the same time, the maintenance contract that you speak of, a lot of the times that Steve knows is when they have the further treatment systems, the anaerobic denitrification systems, because those have a lot of mechanical parts, and at the same time, they usually put in highly sensitive areas, and part of that contract will be to test it and make sure it's running right, and to do sampling to make sure it's putting out an effluent that's within guidelines, usually 25 milligrams per liter effluent. effluent going into the septic leach field or the ground. So most of those maintenance contracts are to maintain more sophisticated, almost like treatment system plants. My advice would be, if you're, following this chart, but at the same time, follow this chart and have if you can get a qualified septic pumper that, has good credentials and a good reputation. And when they come, say it's every 2 years, just have them say, hey, could I wait a year? Should I have done it quicker? And if you have a reputable pumper and your usage doesn't change, just stay consistent. You should be able to find out what works for your household from there.
Cool. Okay. So one of the questions we got, which I felt I could answer, was we have city water. Should that affect our maintenance strategy for a septic system? And I paraphrase this a little bit, but really, I think the question is, do I need to be as worried if I'm not worried about my water supply, is the way I took it. So, and really, it shouldn't change a thing, because protecting your well is only one piece of what you're really doing your maintenance for. It's really to protect your system. It's going to fail if you don't do the proper maintenance and all those things. But it's also then could become a contaminant source if it's not, if things aren't for groundwater aquifers, nearby wells. All those things matter as far as where you live. But, you want to maintain that so it'll last as long as it can. So I don't think it changes your maintenance strategy at all, whether you're on city water or whether you have a well. So anyway. All right. So, Jim, what is the life expectancy of a septic system?
I've heard, I believe EPA has it at 30 years. I've seen septic systems that lasted over 100 years. It's about maintenance, how was it installed, and, what have you been putting down at all these years? There's a class example here in Massachusetts. If you were to put a new system in, we would, what's called a deep hole and perk test for where the leach field is, and we would make sure that the septic is the leach field is not emptying out into the ground 4 feet above the highest groundwater table ever. So really, you have 4 feet of clean soil before the highest water ever was. So you can see, if you are maintaining that kind of depth, you're never going to have a hydraulic, well, I won't say never, but most likely you won't have the hydraulics go 4 feet in the ground to hydraulically fill the septic tank, the leach field. And if it's maintained the right way, pumped it the right way, the solids not making into the leach field, the biofilm doesn't get too clogging, so it allows the water down, then, you could extend it 30, 50, who knows how many years. But the general guideline is between 25 and 30 years for everything I've heard.
Okay. Capacity testing intervals per person, tank size. I wasn't even sure exactly what they're asking here, but I'm assuming you do.
I'm thinking what they're saying is, what size tank should they have for how many people in the house, how big the house is. Referring back to Massachusetts, we think of every bedroom having 2 people in it. So we do things by the bedroom and double occupancy every bedroom, and 55 gallons per person, 110 per bedroom. And what we want is 3 days storage capacity in the septic tank. So using that criteria, a 3-bedroom home has to have a 1,000-gallon minimum septic tank, and then the leach field is of a size to take in that much water. So I would keep that as kind of a basic rule, is 110 gallons per bedroom, how many people you have there, and then how big your septic tank is from there. And you want 3 days capacity. So, if you have a 4-bedroom home, you probably have to go a 1,500 gallon tank, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's what they're looking for.
Yeah. No, that's good information. I had not heard it that way before, by bedroom. So thanks. So, and you kind of answered part of this, but how do you know when it's time to clean your septic tank? And it's really just based on, is it just based on the solids level?
Yes, it's for a homeowner, it's hard to know what you have for sludge at the bottom, because it's based on what you have for your scum level, which is the solids up top, and the scum, which is all the stuff that settles to the bottom. And in between, that's basically, I don't want to call it clean water, but that's the water, if you will, of the tank. And you really don't want those solids to get between 50 to 70. Anything over 70, you're really bad. But between 50 and 70% solid buildup is when they usually tell you to pump it. Now, being a homeowner, I don't expect them to go out there with a sludge judge and do the calculations, etc. So, like I said, it's really up to having a qualified and reputable service provider that will just let you know that, hey, I'm going to pump it today, but you probably could have been 3 years, or vice versa. So it's really, finding a qualified and trustworthy professional. Some of your local boards of health will have licensure for pumpers. That might be a way to start, or they might carry a list of qualified people. They can't recommend usually, but they will give you a list of qualified, number of them, and kind of make a decision from there.
Well, I imagine these days you can even use, Google search and Yelp and some of those things to find feedback and information on individuals that are in the business, so to speak. So, you just have to be inquisitive a little bit and search. Okay. So what questions would you ask a professional to be sure you're hiring a competent person to inspect your system? Led right into that, didn't we?
I mean, first of all, I would see what kind of requirements are required for your area. I know in Massachusetts, local boards of health, they license installers of septic systems. They license pumpers for septic systems. They, you have to have certain credentials to design a septic system. So it's really finding out those credentials that are applicable where you live, and then asking the whoever you're interviewing as a possibility to do the work that you're looking for. Do they have those credentials? Could I see them? And any other network information you might be able to get. Like Steve said, Angie's List and all stuff like that. I'm sure with all the new computer-based rating systems, there's plenty of ways to vet people.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I couldn't think of Angie's List a minute ago. I was trying to. Okay, so for a vacation home where they're not there, maybe 1 week every couple of months, how does that change things, and what would that change as far as their service in their tank? I mean, does it kill the bacteria, or do they just go dormant, or I don't know any of those things. So
actually, yeah, I mean, if it's like a vacation home, summer home, and you're only there during summer, there's no water going into during the winter, you're not much flow, that's going to have negative effects on the bacteria in the tank. You're not constantly feeding them, you're not constantly giving them new water. When wintertime, you're not giving them any warmth. The warmth of water coming out of a home is a lot warmer than the ground at those times. So all that is going to have a detriment on your septic system and your septic tank, because again, that steady flow of sustenance, like any living thing wants. They want water, they want food, they want warmth, and you're not giving them a constant amount of that. And at the same time, too, being a vacation home, you might say it's 4th of July and you have the whole family over for a party, and that septic tank and that system just went from 0 use to having a family of 25. So you can imagine it's just not made to ramp up and work that quickly. Biological processes don't work that quickly. So it is something to keep more on, and I would actually pump it, probably every 2 years. Like I said, without that, the biologics getting worked up and getting optimized, you're probably not going to have the breakdown like you would in a normal septic system.
Okay. So really you just need to pump it more because it's just more of a holding tank than anything else.
At that point, yes. I mean, at the summertime, you might get it up to optimization by Labor Day, but by next Memorial Day, you pretty much got started from fresh again.
Sure. Okay, so how much waste can a septic system process daily? And they were asking in the context of loads of laundry they can do.
It's really based on size and, size and loading and stuff like that. A septic tank, like I mentioned before, it's trying to get 3 days. What a septic tank is, you're trying to get 3 days holding of it. So if you got a 1,000-gallon tank, you don't want to put over 330 gallons a day. Your best approach is always to try to separate how many loads of laundry in different days as possible. Being too the detergents and everything else that go into the tank all at the same time, that also could have issues with the bacteria and the biological processes in there. So, it's always best to separate them, if you will, but, you don't really want to go over, say, most people have a 1,000-gallon tank, 300 gallons a day per thing, because you won't have enough time in that septic tank for the septic tank to do its job.
Do you know, and I'm sorry I'm asking this because I'm putting you on the spot, do you know how much a load of laundry, how much water that is? I have no idea.
It really varies now. If you have a traditional old school washing machine, I think it fills up to 12 gallons, but some of the new ones are so efficient that, it might be all the way to 3 or 4. I'm not exactly sure. But then some of the high capacity front loaders I know use a lot less water than the old traditional ones.
I would expected that to be a much bigger number. That's really surprising, even for the old tanks. So interesting. All right, thank you. Okay, so what can the health department do to assist homeowners with their septic systems? I know, and I added state programs vary based on what I meant there was for the state programs vary is some states are much more, have a lot more rules and do a lot more enforcement than others. But yeah, I think this question might have been asked by a health department about how do they help their folks with septic systems.
Yeah, I mean, have a lot of information available would be the best thing. Like I mentioned, if they have permitting or some sort of list of qualified, contractors, inspectors, pumpers, whatever it might be, that always very helpful for homeowners too. So at least they have a list of people that have done work in town and have done good work in town. Not that the health department can recommend anyone. At the same time, too, a lot of the health inspectors that have been there for a lot of years have a lot of institutional knowledge of where the bad places are in town, where the subdivisions that a lot of the septic systems have failed. Whether it be nearby a lake that's contaminated or just bad soils in that area, or just maybe the contractor 60 years ago just did a bad job of installing everything. So that, too, they might be able to give you some guidance on where, particularly where you are in their town or their county, and what are the issues in that area.
Oh, that's cool. That's a good idea. And I meant to ask earlier when you were talking about the 330 gallons a day for a 1,000-gallon tank, would you say it's better to always go bigger with a septic tank? I mean, maybe I only need 1,000, but would it benefit me and be better for, the bugs and everything else if I got a 1,500-gallon one? Or is that bad?
I don't see why it would be bad, because really what you're looking for is that settling of the solids in the tank, and then the biological process of starting in the tank to break down those solids. So the longer it sits there to settle out, and the longer it has contact time with the bugs to do their thing before passing on to the leach field and deblock, it just seems like it would be beneficial, if you will.
Yeah. Yes, I would say that's what I got out of your answer a while ago. Okay, so can you speak to the differences in state laws for separation between the well and your absorption field? This person mentioned New Hampshire and Florida is different than Massachusetts, and I don't know if there's a lot to say there, but I wanted to address it.
Well, I for full disclosure, I'm kind of biased being in Massachusetts most of my career. But at the same time, I could see it too as Massachusetts geography. Like, I'm going to compare it to New Hampshire. Massachusetts geography, here at the Cape, you can get very sandy soils. And then once you get to central and western Mass, you're up to your clays and sandy loams, etc. So you're going to get better treatment in those sandy loams, those clays, as the water moves through, as opposed to a sand where it's going to move through a lot rapider. I would imagine New Hampshire, other than by the seacoast, which is only like 3 towns, they have most of the same geological formations of like central and western Mass. So maybe why they have 75. Florida is pretty surprising. It's only 50-foot setback with such sandy soils down there, and I understand limestone, crevices, etc. So, but I couldn't say who comes up with these things. I will say, from what I've seen in the field, the further distance away, the better for public health. Not in a private well setting, but I've seen in a public well setting, a well being 175 feet away. Not a huge public water system, but I think it only served like 36, 40 people, and 175 feet away, that well was pulling in 2.5 times drinking water standards, but never had a bacterial hit. And as soon as the system was repaired, that went down from 25 to like 1. So you can see that even 175 feet away, the well that was impacted by the septic system failing, and that was 175 feet away. Again, the well was a public water system, so it has a big, larger span of influence, but still at 175, you're still having effects.
Yeah, I would agree that I think in some cases it's more arbitrary and maybe more of a political decision based on who's lobbying for a higher or a smaller number. And so you really can't, you can't speak to, I think you address the issues that matter, and that's the geology and the flow paths of the groundwater, shallow groundwater, that really should dictate how far away those things are. And, those are minimums is the way what I tell well owners when we show some of these things for setbacks for a lot of other things, it's a minimum. It doesn't mean that you should put it at that distance. So you should put it as far away as you can, which is what you said initially. And I think that's totally the way to look at it. Better for public health. So, and then there's a question here, which I was really interested in because, I have no idea. I know you see a lot of old concrete tanks, but so what's the difference between concrete and plastic, and pros, cons, and longevity of each? Have you seen any differences that you've noted in your career?
You've seen plastic tanks as of late coming on more. Definitely they're lighter, so they're easier to move along the site. And from what I understand, they're cheaper too. One negative I've seen about plastic tanks, though, is the fact that they are more fragile. I know when someone's trying to locate a septic tank, sometimes they do what's called a ground probe. It's basically just a very thin metal hole that you would put into the ground and try to find out where the septic tank is generally. But you could break a plastic tank by doing something like that. A concrete tank, most likely it's not going to break. Longevity, plastic tanks are relatively new. Concrete ones have been around for years, so that's something that would, to be continued, if you will. I know plastic pipe for drinking water issues and wastewater is, the standard now, and it lasts, a good 100 years. I would imagine the plastic tanks would too. So I think the biggest thing there for plastic tanks, the biggest con would be, they're not as durable as concrete.
All right. So we've got about 6 questions from people to answer, but I'm going to go through this. I'm going to spend about 5 minutes going through some information about our private well class first, and then that'll be the end of the slides. So I want to talk about that because if you're here to learn about septic systems and how that affects your well, hopefully, you should know about our class. So if you go to privatewellclass.org, you can sign up for, it's a free class, 10 lessons. It walks you through information on the geology, how well types, common problems with wells, a lot of things that will help you become a better steward of your well and a better operator, if you will, of your system, and understand when you have problems and what those might be. This is the front page. You click on Learn by Email on the bottom left, and it takes you to a page where you can sign up for the class. And then, we ask where you live, and it's by state, partly because part of what we deliver back to EPA, who funds this program, is the number of people and where they're from that we've supported through this program. And it's meant to be national in scope, and so this allows us to show that it is. And it's been really successful. We had over 6,000 people take it, and we've had about 15,000 people do our webinars over the last 4 or 5 years. So I want to point that out. With each lesson, there's a resource library of information from other sources, and they're meant to be, if the way it's worded in it's 6 to 10 pages for each lesson, PDF, if you will. And there's other sources of information which we link to from universities, health departments, extension, things like that. And this is just for lessons 1 and 2, the type of information that's available. And we found some really cool stuff, like on the first one under lesson 2, the Michigan Flowing Well Handbook. Michigan is losing 28 million gallons of water a day to flowing wells. So they passed a law and decided everybody had to cap them. To kind of protect that resource. And it's really interesting. It's got diagrams, everything else, things like that. We do webinars like the one we're doing today on a lot of different topics, also for sanitarians and realtors and labs. And this is a webinar we did in 2016 about lead and for private well owners, really more talking about their homes and the issues that they might have as a private well owner. But also in some areas where there's naturally aggressive or corrosive water, you can have issues if there's other things. We're actually going to repeat this webinar or do a new version of it in August of this year as well. And so we've created a few pages. We're actually working on a septic page as part of our grant this year to provide more resources, and we'll link to a lot of the things that I've shown today. But this is a lead page which links back to CDC and US EPA and a lot of information out there on what to do if you're concerned about lead in your home and in your well and water system. We have a bunch of short videos. There's 16 of them right now on how does, this one's on how does my private well system work. There's one on how does my pressure tank work. It's had, I think, over 200,000 hits in 2.5 years. And so they're just 4 to 6 minutes long, meant to give you just a quick overview of what's going on with your well. A number of issues that come up all the time, like shared wells. In most states, they're not regulated if they're under the EPA listing for a community water supply. So you might have 4 homes on a well or 6 homes on a well, and it's not regulated at all. But there's a lot of problems with having a shared well that you might not understand. And this video just gives you some of the information you need to know, and what best practices are, why you should have a contract with everyone involved, things like that. We even have podcasts that Katie's developed on the first 3 lessons, and then some interviews we've done for RFD Illinois, the farm radio station here, on that are available on a podcast, and that's had over 2,000 downloads as well. So the goal of our program and why we do these webinars is really to help well owners understand why their well is important and why they need to understand how it works as well as their septic system, and then that allows them to protect themselves from risk. And so there's you need to understand the basics of why you're a well owner and what that means and what the responsibility is, not only for you and your family, but anyone that might drink the water you have, to protect your aquifer. Source water protection is a huge issue. We see people who find these old abandoned dug wells who think they're a great place to throw things, and what you're likely doing there is contaminating an aquifer in some cases. So that's what I have for the presentation. I'm going to pull over the questions we have, which are right here. Hang on a second. I'm slow at this. I have to enlarge this a little bit so it's easier for everyone to see. And I'll make that full screen. Okay, so first question, please describe the difference between a septic system and an aerobic treatment system. Not all individual non-community sewer is septic. Certainly. So Jim, I know there's a lot of alternative septic systems, if you will, that are aerobic or other kinds of treatment because of special cases, and now they're becoming more commonplace, and they actually do a much better job maybe in treating specific contaminants. Do you want to give a quick overview of what you've worked with?
Sure. What I've seen the difference between the aerobic and anaerobic is aerobic systems, most of the ones I deal with are denitrification systems. There's a special tank to bring the septic effluent into, and it's given into a media and usually given a highly oxygenated area. And that gets put into nitrification. And then some of that water goes back to the septic tank, which is anaerobic. And that's where denitrification happens, and that brings down the nitrogen load in the septic system. So that's usually what I've seen the reason why the aerobic treatment is done, is first to get that nitrification, and then to put it back in the anaerobic environment and get the denitrification before putting it into the D-box and then the leach field. So that's the thing, that there's less nitrogen to break down once it hits the ground and before it hits the groundwater, especially in the nitrogen-sensitive area with groundwater wells or close to lakes or other water features, if you will.
Great. Yeah, we probably, if we do this again, or maybe we should do a webinar that's specifically about some of these alternative systems and some of the issues. We just have to find, we just have to figure out what's the best information to actually put into a webinar. How do you measure the solids yourself in your tank?
I mean, your best bet, as a homeowner, would probably be a hinge stick. It sounds pretty rudimentary, but it works. Basically, you could stick the hinge stick down into the scum layer and pull up, and you'll kind of feel where it starts getting that friction, if you will, from the scum layer up top. And from there, you can take it back out and basically kind of measure how far down it is. And same thing with the scum layer. If you put the stick down there and bring it up, you sometimes see with the scum layer how far the scum layer goes up on the pole once you hit the bottom of the septic tank. And from there, if you have the measurements for how deep your water is from the operating level of the septic tank down to the bottom, you can kind of calculate, what percentage of your tank is solid at that point. And again, you don't want to be, you want to, anything between 50 to 70, you want to pump the tank.
Okay. It sounds a little complicated. Probably, unless you have the wherewithal, it's probably better to have someone come measure it for you, I guess.
Yeah, your best bet, a professional will come in what's called a sludge judge. It's basically a big straw, if you will, with a mechanical, like you would take a straw and put it into a soda and put your finger on top to take the water out. The same idea, it's just like a big straw with a mechanical top on top. So they put it in the septic tank, put that, basically put your finger on the pipe or, mechanical thing to close to keep that airtight. They would pull it up, and then you would have a column of water in your septic tank. And from there, you could measure what you have for solids and sludge. So that's the professional way to do it, but, as a homeowner, the hinge stick would work. But I would suggest just have the professional come and do a sludge judge.
Okay, does the chloride in water softener backwash end up in the groundwater with the septic tank, remove any of the chloride? We kind of addressed this, but does the chloride in water softener backwash end up in the groundwater? Well, I think it depends. Yeah. Go ahead.
First of all, I wouldn't put the water softener into the septic tank. So we would never be there to remove the chloride. I guess it's possible that anything could get into the groundwater depending on where it's injected. I would imagine if it's, into a dry well and you have enough clearance of undisturbed soil before the groundwater table, that it would be at least minimized. But you know, at the top of my head now, I couldn't say it would never meet there. But at the same time, I wouldn't have any backflow going into my septic tank. So.
Well, I'd say the reality is that the volume overall is small enough that it's not going to, you know, it's not going to contaminate an entire aquifer or that sort of thing. I mean, where we see real problems with chlorides is with road salt. And, you know, those are applied in some areas, like urban areas around Chicago, so thick and over so many roads and everything else that we have seen shallow groundwater increase in, you know, from that. So, but I think one issue is the span of influence that it would have on, you know, an aquifer per se would be pretty small. Not to belittle the issue, but I mean, if it's enough that it's getting down there and affecting like your well water, then, you know, it goes back to the example you gave earlier, I guess. So, is it bad to pump out your tank too often?
I would say yes, because every time you pump in your tank out, you're taking out, you know, you are taking out the waste that didn't break down, but at the same time, you're also taking out all the bacteria that bacterial flock that you had going in the tank. One thing I will suggest, if possible, is you know, if you could choose, I would say pump in the spring as opposed to the fall. Reason being is the ground is heating up. You know, the biologics are, the warmer the temperature is, the better biologics are growing and multiplying and doing their work. So if you are going to deplete your septic tank, you know, you can do it in the fall by all means if there's a problem. But if I had my choice, I would want to do it in the spring and have the whole summer heating and the warmth to get that bacterial flock up to maximum, to maximize the bacteria in the quickest manner, if you will.
Okay. So when a septic system fails, what's the cause? I mean, I assume there's a number of causes, right?
Yeah, it could be anything from, you know, the groundwater table is frozen up and there's nowhere for the water to go anymore other than backwards or up. Or it could be that the biomat has just gotten so thick that it's waterproof now. Or you could have got grease into the septic leach field and that's blocking flow. You know, there's any number of things that could cause, you know, failure, if you will. I mean, this says, oh, actually, yeah, I'm sorry. It says the septic tank failure.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So distance from well. So does the distance from well water basically allow for a depth, account for the depth of the well? My well is 225 feet deep. The leach field's a bit less than 100 feet laterally. You know, I think it comes back to how the well is cased, but I mean, I think the law is pretty clear that it's meant laterally, right?
Yes, it basically it's from it's laterally, and it's from the wellhead, and it's 100 feet in all directions, and it's also neighbors' wells, public water system wells, you know, basically any well or leach field in 100-foot direction. So I mean, if you know, if they were building if you had a subdivision map and all, you would see these big circles around all the wells all throughout that subdivision.
It's actually a really good question, though, because it gets to the example I gave earlier where you have a sand and gravel well that's got a screen from 196 to 200 feet, you know, the bottom 4 feet, if you will, versus a bedrock well that maybe only has 20 feet of casing. It certainly can make a difference on whether or not your well might get contaminated, but I don't think it makes a difference in any kind of legal sense, is the bottom line. So, and lastly, could a sheet be provided? This is really for us, I guess. Could a sheet be provided with the links you went over for information from the EPA website and other websites? Sure. We actually, like I said, we plan, Katie's already started on a septic web page that we can put up and have it available. that will certainly link to things like the EPA Septic Smart and Septic program websites and things from Nessie and other information we can find. And we're pretty good at that. So I don't have that available today, and we don't have a sheet available today. But you know, I kind of went through, especially for the EPA website. It was all right there. It's just, you know, epa.gov/septic, and you know, all the links are through those 5 sections that are listed on the left side that I showed today. So, but no, we will get that up, and we can always send an email out to everyone when that's ready. I won't guarantee it in the next few weeks, but we are working on something like that and hope to have it done very soon. So it's a good idea. So that's all we have for today. No other questions. We are going to call us good. And thanks again, Jim, for participating today and all of sharing all your wisdom and advice. I learned a lot today. And thanks, Katie, for putting all this together and making me look good, basically. So I really appreciate it. Thank you for staying around, and everyone who's in attendance. If you have any further questions, you can email us at info@privatewellclass.org. And on our webpage, you can find that email link as well as our phone number. So thanks again, and I hope everyone has a great day. Thanks, Jim.
No problem. Take care.
You too.